Thank you so much for joining me today for the Confident Sober Women podcast. I am so excited to have you and to share you and your story with my audience. So I'm going to turn the mic over to you, let you share a little bit more about your story, and then we're going to chat.
Thanks, Shelby. It's really nice to be here, and I'm delighted you asked me. It's nice to be in the company of other sober women.
Sure is.
So I guess I'll just share a little bit about my story and how I got into recovery. I started drinking. My first drink was in Nantucket on vacation, and I always noticed that my parents had gin and tonic. And so they had left to go for a walk on the beach, and I decided to mix myself a gin and tonic at 13. The only thing was I didn't know that the gin had the alcohol in it, so I poured myself a big glass of tonic and drank that. And so I didn't really have any alcohol, but I perceived that I had had alcohol. I didn't feel any effect, but it's telling to me that I poured myself a large glass. I didn't even like the taste. You'd think I would have poured a little bit just to see if I liked it, but no, I poured
Mhm.
myself a large glass and had a tonic. So fast forward a couple years later in middle school, a friend brought slow gin to middle school, and in the morning she asked if I would like to have some. And again, I didn't drink moderately. She took a sip of it, didn't like it, handed the pint to me, and I drank most of it. And I didn't feel so well, and got picked up later by a parent who thought I was, a little under the weather. But again, I drank a lot of what was given to me, and that time it was alcohol, and I did like the feeling. I really did. I drank on and off in high school, but I was kind of a goody two-shoes. So the few times I did drink, I had too much to drink, but my drinking took off when I went away to college. Um, in the late 1970s, beer was readily available, and if you were of the female persuasion, you could go to fraternities and drink for free, which I did Friday and Saturday, and then it started to be Thursday nights, and then there was usually a party on Wednesday. And so, really, Wednesday through Saturday or Wednesday through Sunday for 4 years, I drank nonstop. Looking back now, I realized that my drinking there was very problematic. I didn't understand the concept of blackout, but I drank to blackout most of the time. I almost never remembered getting home or remembered wherever I ended up that night, which frequently wasn't home. And so after college, I got a job and deferred admission to law school. I never went. And my drinking just continued to escalate, but it wasn't problematic from the standpoint of I always held a job. I always paid my rent. I always made my car payments. Um, but I drank heavily as often as I could and almost every night after work and a lot more on the weekends. When my son was 2 years old, I got a DUI coming home from
Mm.
work in Baltimore on New Year's Eve. And in my mind, I wasn't drunk because I had been working, and my boss and I actually shared a bottle of champagne after midnight when we were kind of cleaning up after this party. I was in the catering world at that time. And that was nothing for me. To have half a bottle of champagne just was like a normal person maybe having a glass of wine, small glass of wine. But I was pulled over because a headlight was out and I got a DUI. And my dad was an attorney and represented me in court, and I got probation before judgment. But the shame of that arrest made me decide to stop drinking.
Mm.
So I stopped drinking for over 2 years and on a work trip, and I just stopped drinking. And on a work trip out of town, I started drinking again. I don't call it a relapse because I was not in a program of recovery. There was absolutely nothing between me and a drink. I didn't think about it. I didn't consider it. I didn't think, oh, you're you're going to start drinking heavily again. I didn't think about it. I just started drinking again. And on a work trip, I drank to blackout that entire weekend. And for the next 3 years, my drinking, I describe it as like having my foot on the accelerator and somebody having a cement block that they were pushing down on top of my foot because I just drank more and more and more.
Mhm.
And by the end of my drinking, the most frustrating part was that I wasn't even feeling the effects of a magnum of wine, splitting half a bottle of wine with my husband, which was like what I did that he could see, and then drinking several miniatures, up to a pint of vodka on my way from the liquor store back to my house to start my drinking for the night. What propelled me into recovery was the last 6 months of drinking, where I stood in front of the mirror every morning and said, really meaning it, I'm not going to drink tonight. Um,
Mhm.
I was exhausted. I was really underweight. I was like, I don't know how I was holding it together. I was running my own business at the time that employed many people, consulting firm. And every night I would drive to the liquor store and get what I needed for that night again. I could not stop drinking and I did not feel the effect. I fell on top of our son at a Super Bowl party, and he was 13 at the time. And he was just absolutely mortified. And the next day, my husband said something to me for the first time about my drinking, and my son said something to me about my drinking. And I had a business card that I had put in my wallet from a therapist who said that he specialized in working with people who um, were struggling with alcoholism and addiction. And I had picked up that card for a friend who was drinking too much. And I ended up calling this man and going to see him. And at the end of our first session, I'd done a lot of work in therapy in my family of origin growing up. So I was comfortable with therapy, but I'd done a lot of exploration, I guess. And at the end of the first session, he said to me, I'm happy to continue working with you, but have you thought about trying Alcoholics Anonymous? I said, no, haven't thought about that.
Mhm.
And he said, well, why don't you give that a try? And that started my journey.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing all of that and so vulnerably. It's always a pleasure to share time and space with other women in recovery who are willing to do that, right? Because that's how it works. That is how it works. Um, so you got sober, it sounds like in 12 step, kind of a while ago. One of the things that I talk a lot about here, and maybe we can fast forward a tiny bit to this, is I believe that in that first year of sobriety, however you get sober, we kind of celebrate all ways here. I got sober in 12 step as well, but I understand that's not the only way. And I also know that even though I do recommend it in the beginning for people, because for a variety of reasons, very often we need to layer on other things, throughout our time there. We need to layer on therapy and coaching and natural wellness and other kinds of healing modalities as we get further along. But in the beginning, that fellowship can be really, really helpful. So either way, however you feel about it, but after we get sober and stay sober for about a year or so is what I've seen myself and what I've seen in so many of the women I work with, there comes to be this time where we kind of wake up to life. The early sobriety period's usually so filled with tension and turmoil and emotional dysregulation and solving problems, like there might be legal problems, relationship challenges, health struggles, and there's just a lot going on. We kind of have like special needs during that time. But then once we get to that year mark or so, and then beyond that into the many years, we begin to wake up and that fog is lifted, our minds are clear, and suddenly we start to see, the opportunities that are available to us. These things come up, bubbling into our heart, our desires, right, start to come up, and we begin to think like, oh, maybe I want to write a book, or I want to start a business, or I want to get out of my marriage, or I want to have a baby, or, whatever it is. There's just things that start to come up because suddenly they look available to us. Where when we were in active addiction, none of that looked available to us. We had hopes and dreams from the bar stool, right? But we weren't really able to pursue them. And we certainly didn't have the mindset or proper thought patterns or beliefs about ourselves to do that. And so that was my experience, as is so many of the women that I work with. And I'm curious if you can relate to that and if that was kind of true for you.
Yes and no. I have to start by saying that I absolutely hated the first year of recovery. Um, I kept hearing in 12-step programs, and I agree with you. I think there's so many ways to get sober. It's not important how you get sober or how you stay sober, but that you do it. And I think support is absolutely critical and the community that you surround yourself. But I always like to mention that for the first year, I really, really hated 12 step, but I wasn't drinking. So I would go to a noon meeting, hoping I wouldn't run into anyone I knew, which is hysterical now because I'm very out and active and vocal about being in sobriety. And I realized, after the fog cleared that, hey, if somebody else was in that room, they needed help too. And it was okay. But I just basically went to meetings and compared out and thought of all the reasons that I wasn't like all these other people in the room.
Mhm.
And I mention that because I think a lot of people have that experience and they leave because of it.
Yeah.
Eventually, I heard someone who was the male version of me. He was like a guy with my story, and I was able to compare in. And it was like a switch got turned in my mind, and I started listening to what people said that I could relate to instead of listening to what people said and having that judgmental voice in my head going, oh, well, I didn't end up in a gutter or I didn't end up here. I still had my family, I still had my work, all these things. So I mentioned that because it eventually I did a full come around about how I felt about that. Where I got to in terms of the light being lifted or kind of having some realization was actually doing the work.
Mhm.
And I always equate it to fitness because fitness has always been an important part of my life.
Mhm.
And, you can go to a gym, right? But if you don't do the work in the gym, if you don't lift the weights, if you don't go consistently, you're not going to have any results. So I think for me, after the first year, especially, I started to invest in my own recovery. I'll also mention that what also I came to realize was that I will replace one addiction with another. The
Mhm.
addictive mind for me is can lots of things can fill that void. And one of the things that I filled the void with was exercise, but I also exercised to excess for quite a period of time in my recovery. And I didn't realize I was doing it, but I was like working out at a rate and a pace that was unhealthy. And I was pushing myself to pain because, again, I didn't want to deal with all the stuff that comes up when you're not numbing out from drugs and alcohol. And so, a really good therapist I was working with at the time pointed out to me, I think that, you've replaced one thing for another, and let's look at all the things underneath so we can deal with those things and deal with those issues, which you do in 12 step, but that I also did in therapy.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you so much for mentioning that because I totally agree with you about adding in other things. I have a similar mind, it sounds like, to yours, and what I think probably many others do, although I feel like in modern sobriety these days, it's getting a little bit watered down. So I don't hear some of the same kind of language expressed in the same way that you and I probably heard it in our day. And maybe that's okay. It's just different. But I agree, and I am an addict, like, and I'm not afraid to say that. I don't feel shame about it. I'm totally fine with who I am and what I am. I accept that, and that's why I use those. I say alcoholic and addict for me because I actually don't want to forget that part of me. It's not who I am. It's not my identity. It's just one part, like many other identities that I have. But I don't want to forget that, and so for me, it's very important to have a reminder. Maybe other people don't need that, but I do, because like you, I have had that experience where I've replaced the alcohol and drugs with other things. Exercise and fitness was a huge problem for me too. Problem slash help, right? Because part of in my active addiction, I had problems with food a lot, like body image issues and like a lot of very dysfunctional behavior. And so that at times of stress throughout my years of early sobriety in the beginning and for many years could come in very quickly. And that would be sometimes my first thing. Like I knew I couldn't drink or drug, so I would just pick food or something else to focus on as a new obsession in an effort to control. And it took me anyway for me years to kind of cover that and deal with it and work on those negative beliefs that I had about myself. And then also to learn really who I am today and what are the very most important things to my life, which what are my personal core values. And also today still, I have to be very cautious about anything that looks like that. So for me, it's food. That's how it's become. And I actually went the opposite way during COVID times, and then a little bit here a couple years ago. We were raising teenagers. It was very challenging, and I became very emotional eater. And I was never that way before. I was much more disciplined, but I sort of went the opposite. And now I was using that as a drug of choice for me, and I could see it happening. I knew it was happening. I just did it anyway, you know. And it the consequences were real, right? I didn't feel good. I gained a lot of weight. I had other, just mood challenges, right? Based on the way that I was feeding myself. So yes, I agree. We have to really be mindful of that thing. At the same token, vitality is literally one of my core values, one of my 5 core values, which is all things health and wellness, right? All things aging gracefully, feeding myself well, living into my older adulthood, feeling good. And to me, that is involves nutrition and exercise and movement, right? And so it's just important to figure out how do we do these things in a healthy way.
Well, you hit on something that really resonated with me, and it's like the saying, and I used to hate the slogans and stuff in 12 step, but it starts with awareness, right? It starts with awareness of what's going on and really being real. And I was so good at deceiving myself about what was actually happening in active addiction. So I really appreciate you sharing that about how you kind of fell into that situation, but that even though you were aware of it, you knew you were doing it, it still happened. So it does mean that I think we need to be mindful. And mindfulness is probably the core value I'm working on most now. So I'll give you an example. I went to the gym this morning and took a class for the first time. We're in another city right now, and I'm also intensely competitive, but I don't let anybody know I'm competitive. I just am really competitive. And a lot of the people in this fitness class with me today were older than me. So, of course, I'm thinking, oh, I can do all of this, but I hadn't been in a class with weights for a long time. And I'm I became mindful and aware of the fact that my shoulders have been bothering me. And I stopped doing overhead lifts in this class to music, which I love, about halfway through. And that was a huge, like, that's a big win for me because I didn't look like I had my shit together, right? I had to stop before the 80-year-old guy next to me. And I did it anyway. And you know what? I feel good today. I feel tomorrow when the muscle soreness that should, you know, logically happen after we do lifting sets in, it will be soreness, not pain,
Right.
because I was aware of it and I was mindful, but I have to be mindful. Like I have to really
Mhm.
work on being mindful and aware of the choices that I'm making.
Yeah. I totally agree with you. And it's I think it goes for any topic, right? I have a friend one time who said, she would make comments about like, I don't care if you are, a garbage man, or you work at the grocery store. She's like, but just, be the best garbage man you can be. Like go in there, know what the role is and be the best one you can be. and I used to kind of like chuckle about it, but as I aged, I really latched onto that as such a concept of like, yeah, like be, you know, I like, and it's like food labels or whatever. Like, yeah, we would try to understand our health, and like when you start to read food labels and you understand what you're eating, it's not always going to change you. You're not going to pick a different product necessarily. You might, but it's going to help inform you about what you're doing. And I think that's all we need to really be doing. We need to know what is happening. It's like news or relationships or families or anything else. What is happening? And then you're making it's same with alcohol and drugs, right? And then you're making an informed decision. It's like once we get sober, once we're taught and we're told you are not a person that can drink like other people or use drugs like your fellows. That is not your story. So then now you've been educated on that. So anything from there is a choice. That is a choice. And you're now choosing to use a substance that you know you're allergic to, technically, right? And so I think that mindfulness that you talk about is so critical, and it applies to really any area. And that is the when we know these things, when we know um what are the very most important things to us, we can begin to sort of track our lives according to them, right? We start to make decisions through the lens of those values. And it also helps to helps us to stay in alignment, right? So like, for example, one of the things that I was doing during that difficult time that I was sharing about, we had 4 years of just really tenuous stress with kids and COVID and all the things. It was trauma really for 4 years. And I was just not well. I was doing the best that I could. I was doing the best that I could to stay sane and sober and like be a decent mom and go through all these things. But one of the things that I promised to myself, or one thing that's very important to me, is to move my body, every day. And that's just for me. And so I made those commitments to myself, but sometimes during that period of time when I wasn't well, like all I could do was show up at the gym. We would go to the gym at 5 a.m. and like lay on the mat and stretch, or I would get on the treadmill and put it on like 3.0 and just like but at least I could say I did what I said. I've honored and respected my value of moving my body every single day. And my brain knows that I do what I say because I've worked on that. And so I followed through with what I said, but the grace came in on what that looked like when I was there. So it's not like we have to just throw the bath water out and the baby and be like, oh, I'm not going to the gym. We're doing this. You can still trudge your way to the thing, whatever that is for you that you've decided. But then how it looks when you get there is where the grace comes in my opinion. Like that can be different. Some days are going to be rock star, you're going to be like freaking killing it in there, and then some days you're just there.
I love that you shared that. I wish my younger self had known more that like you honored the commitment that you made and you had the determination to do that, but you weren't like the expectation you had about how that was going to look every day, you kind of let go of that. And I think that's just such a powerful lesson. It's one that I continue to have to work on and learn and give myself that grace when it's not like, the A plus day or whatever in my own grading system. But I think, you hit the nail on the head that, you gave yourself the grace if it needed to be a little bit less. Recently, I've started to eat a plant-based diet. And I decided when I did that, I did it for many reasons, but I decided when I started eating that way that I wouldn't be so rigid because I'm not eating meat for reasons that like I can eat meat.
Right. Right.
Um, and I decided that I didn't want to be so rigid that I became like this martyr for like why I'm doing this. And also that if I felt like it on a given day, that I would incorporate some foods that might not be in the pristine plant-based diet manual that I'm reading, but to make a commitment to move towards that instead of it's like black and white. I'm doing it this way, and this is how it's going to be. Because when I'm that way with myself, I feel like I'm unforgiving to other people about commitments they might make or the way they might want to live. and how they execute that, how that looks for them. And just like that kind of a live and let live philosophy, but that it's starting with me and how I'm treating myself.
Yeah, that is so important on so many levels, but something that I still struggle with. And frankly, I don't know if it's possible. I mean, I guess it's possible, but I don't think it's an easy course for people who are addicts like us. I'm putting you in the same category to have much gray. I've been sober for a couple decades, over 2 decades now, and it's taken probably most of that time to get to the place where I could go to the gym and lay on the mat. That was a really, that's not something that comes naturally for me. Nor can I just have like one Oreo. I can't just do that. It's just not. So like, so
On the
there's
one pack, Shelby, you're okay with that,
so
right?
there's parts of me that are like, I know what I know about myself is that yes, I am learning to give myself grace. I couldn't do that years ago. Even in the first 10 years of sobriety, I was so rigid with all of the things, especially food and exercise. Like there's no way if I said I was going to be on a plant-based diet that I would ever deviate from that. I just wouldn't. I would be like, this is it. I wouldn't judge other people, but I would judge myself. This is how it is. There's no deviation. And that's the only way. And so I've come a long way from there, but boy, like I said, I mean, this is years in the making, years. And some of it I think has to do with age. I'm in my late 40s now, and it's like you change, I'm almost 50. So we change um to create a little bit more gray. But I don't think that's our natural way. That is not how our brains are naturally wired. And frankly, for me, the rigidity and conformity and control was the glue that was keeping me together, in my view. Even without when alcohol was not the glue that was keeping me together anymore, then it became the control and rigidity, and the measuring, the weighing, the exercising, the thing, that became like, well, this is it. This is the solution. This is the key to keeping me together. When that wasn't really true either.
We put up a lot of, I think I'll speak for myself, put up a lot of kind of structure around sobriety, especially early, because I felt like there were still things that I could control and I wanted to control desperately. And I think it was like this fear around the fact that I couldn't control alcohol. And so when I describe my relationship with alcohol now, it is a black and white one. It is that I choose that I cannot drink and I choose not to drink. Both statements are true for me today.
Mhm.
And I think that it's important to understand, what you can control and what you can't control. That's been another kind of big learning curve for me, around understanding what things I had power over and what things I didn't.
Yeah.
And I've lost, somebody said this in a conversation with me the other day, so I'm going to steal his words because they really resonated with me. It's a
Mhm.
guy who's doing data analytics around recovery, systems and impacts. And he said, I've lost my fear of alcohol. He said, I used to have a fear of alcohol. I don't fear it anymore because it wasn't the substance that was keeping me sick. It was how my brain was wired. It was how I reacted to that substance, but it's not the demon. The demons were within me and they were for me to figure out,
Mhm.
what they were and how they were. And I thought it was such a freeing comment.
That is a freeing comment and also speaks to exactly what we've already been talking about, which is that those things are still inside of us sometimes. And so that's why it is that it can show up with other things like food, exercise, sex, or shopping, or whatever. That's why it is, right? Because when we aren't feeling well, when we are feeling out of control, when we don't feel like, you know, we're enough or whatever the thing is, we are going to seek out comfort for that. It's going to be, we all want that. We all want to self-soothe in a way that makes us feel acceptable to ourselves and to the world. And for people like me, that looks like addictive behavior, right? It can look other ways. It can look like meditation and yoga and being outside in nature. It can look like, snuggling with your partner and talking to friends and meeting people for coffee. There's a lot of ways that we can self-soothe. It's just that I know for me, sometimes when I'm not taking care, when I'm not spiritually fit, right? When I'm not focused on what my values are, what those very most important things are to me, and living those out in my daily life, then those demons that are, although healed very much in many ways, still can come in when I don't feel well.
Yeah. And I think core values really are grounding. They are to me. And another one of my core values is having boundaries. I
Mm,
had absolutely no boundaries before I stopped drinking alcohol. And it's something that's developed very slowly,
yeah.
but the boundaries that I've established in healthy relationships with my family, with my friends, with myself, when I'm honoring those boundaries, I really am in a place of calm and being grounded.
Hmm.
And one of the boundaries that I'm struggling with right now is I hate to call it the work-life balance. Like
Mm.
a really smart therapist used to say, those percentages or those models, they change, they shift, and they do. But my relationship with work and really being somewhat of a workaholic,
Mhm.
and doing too much and being there for everyone, those are some boundaries that I'm really having to work on,
Mhm.
18 years into sobriety. So this doesn't stop. And it's really interesting to me that you can apply the principles that I've learned in recovery and into all areas of your life. So that's kind of what's exciting for me now in recovery. It's like, oh, wow,
Mhm.
this is something I'm going to work on. This is something I want to change. This is something that doesn't feel right now. So what can I do about it? How can I structure things so that this is not something I'm overdoing?
Yeah, I'm curious if we could talk for a second about that, about what you just said about boundary. I love the concept of boundaries. I think it's such a beautiful thing. It's also challenging in many ways, and also very new for some people. And they do ebb and flow and change with ages and stages of life, depending on what's going on for us. I thought it was curious that you said that boundaries was one of your core values, and what it made me think was that the immediate thought I had was like, oh, I don't know that boundaries is a core value, but I think what you're trying to protect or create when you have better boundaries would be the value. So thinking about it in that term, like I'm curious about what that really is for you. Is it like, because there's nothing wrong with wanting to work hard. I struggled with this when I started my business a few years ago. It's like, but I was also super excited about it. I was like super excited, and it was fun for me. It was fun. The work was fun for me. So I actually loved spending a lot of time doing it. And of course we do need to balance, but I was just thinking, like, maybe one of your core values is achievement, or success, or other things that would come from, or family, or adventure would come from having boundaries, would be almost like a not the consequence, but it would be the way to get that.
Catalyst. I
Cat.
appreciate that distinction. Thank you. And you're spot on. I think there are two ways that, or there are two core values that actually come as a consequence of having boundaries. So one would be the protection of my serenity, because one of the boundaries that I've had to set is with someone I care really deeply about in my family, who talks to me about things related to another family member that really set me off. I mean, like really set me off. I'm talking sleepless nights. I'm talking about hand wringing, trying to figure out how to fix. I'm a fixer, right? So, in establishing a boundary that this topic is off the table when we talk, and really holding to that boundary when the person goes down the path of starting to talk about this with me, I'm protecting my serenity. So, in that instance, serenity is a core value. I like
Mhm.
sleeping at night. I need
Mhm.
that. I want that. I want peace of mind. And I guess the other one is like you. I'm super passionate about my work. I work in the adult non-alcoholic beverage industry, running a nonprofit that promotes the inclusion of adult non-alcoholic beverages, and I am passionate about it. But again, the boundary of not, working 60 and 70-hour work weeks and saying yes to everyone is that I can be more effective in really honoring the mission of the nonprofit I created
Mhm.
instead of getting wrapped up in all of the yes, I can do everything with everyone.
Yeah, that's so great. So the consequence or the outcome of having clear, healthy, and continuously communicated boundaries is, more peace and serenity, which then makes you more available to not only your work, but to the people that are important to you in your life or other things you might want to do. And then one of the things about work that I think is funny, and as somebody who's I've worked in public service, my whole life, and then became a therapist, and so I've never worked in a corporate environment or quote unquote traditional business, but I live with a high level executive who has been doing that our entire lives. So I feel like I get to live adjacent to that. One of the funny things about work is, when we do create healthy boundaries like that, and when we honor and respect ourselves in that way, we empower other people. And it's a funny thing to think about, really, but when you think like, oh, if I a simple concept would be like, if I don't make myself available, did you ever read The 4 Hour Work Week? It's one of
Yes,
my favorite books of all time. It's old, Tim Ferriss. He's really cool. If you haven't
great.
read it, I would recommend it. It's very easy read. It's quick. One of the things he talks about is how he basically trained his employees in his company to not need him as much by setting healthy boundaries around his time. So he said, "I'm only going to answer my emails at certain time of day." Then he would cut that back, cut that back. He didn't have office hours like just fluent, like anybody could just walk in. There was scheduled time around when he was available, and so what that's doing is, yes, it's protecting your serenity and your peace for sure. That's a byproduct of that. But in the also a consequence is now you've allowed the people that are in your work environment to learn how to solve their own problems. So this is a huge benefit, right? Because one of the things that I think in our society is a humongous problem is the lack of personal responsibility and critical thinking. These are things that are missing. And so when we do this for the people that are in our lives, whether it's personal or professional, when we like I do it with my kids sometimes, they're old, like young adults now, but even still, like they don't think I have a life of any kind. They're like, call me, why didn't you pick up? I'm like, well, I was working. So when I purposely might say I'm not available right now, or no, I can't do this thing, even if I could do it, sometimes I do that in a way to say, let's give it a minute, like unconsciously to say, let's see if you can help solve your own problem, or let's see if you can figure this out. So that's I think that's one benefit of creating some of these time and accessibility boundaries in work that we don't think about as working professionals. Is this making sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I just had a conversation with a person who's really new to working with me, and she has some great ideas. And two of her ideas are ones that I think we should pursue. And I realized I don't have the bandwidth right now to take on this project. And
Mm-hmm.
so I put the ball in her court and I said, this is what I think, this is what I'd love you to find out more about this. And
Mm-hmm.
she came up in a conversation with a list of things that she needed to ask about this project to the folks that she has to talk with, and was basically kind of asking me, is this what you would say if it was what you were
Mm-hmm.
doing? And I said, yeah, this is exactly what you need to find out. Go ahead and see what you can find out. And I think, this is a project that may happen, but it's going to happen not because of the work I do. It's going to be happen because of the investment that she makes in taking the time to find this out. And then how vested will she be in that solution if she's actually the person that's created it too?
Yeah. I just think it's natural sometimes for us to want, especially people who are normally like kind of in control and like want to take charge, not because they're trying to be bossy, but that's just your personality. It's natural for us to want to do that. But when we kind of widen the lens a little bit and look and hold our tongue, I feel like I I coach this in my own home a little bit sometimes. I don't think it's received well a lot or acted on, but I often see it and I'm thinking, why don't you try to like not be available? Put up a sign that says, do not disturb or shut your door, or create some space where you're not able to just have people in your office all the time. So I think when we take an opportunity to step back and look for the spaces for that, um, we get to be involved in being supportive and coming alongside others in a way that maybe we did not think of, but can be extremely impactful to the other people in our lives. Um, yeah, so I think we should all try to look for that, do that a little bit more, right? Plus, it
I
does
do
create
too.
a lot more peace and serenity on the inside for each of us too.
I
Yeah.
love that you're doing that with your adult children. It's awesome.
I'm trying to like I saw a big transition when I started working more. I was home with them for 6 years because I had too many kids. I couldn't afford the daycare anymore. And so was the CEO of our family. And then I slowly went back and built my practice over time. But once I was doing that more often, they were so used to me being available all the time. And so I felt like I had to kind of retrain. I mean, kids are naturally self-centered anyway, and I get it. And I'm their
Right.
mom and I want to be available. But like I had to learn to make them wait. I had to learn to say no, just for the sake of it, not to be a jerk, but just to say, like, you need to learn that no, I'm not available at every single second, and also that sometimes in life you are going to have to wait. This is a natural part of growing up in adulthood. So it's hard sometimes, but I think it's impactful. Um, so I'm curious if there's anything specifically, and just in our last couple minutes here, that you have done in your life. We've talked a lot about the concept of core values, which is something that for sure I talk about in my work. It's the entire fourth module of my program because it's so important. And or it's the third module actually. I'm curious if there's a specific activity that you've ever done, or if there's like a tool that you've used to help you discover what your core values are.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I would say I love the written word. Like if I just had somebody who wanted to do an interview with me, a short interview, and she said, if you'd prefer, you can answer these questions in writing. And I was like, yes, this is great because I'm inherently a writer. And so I feel like journaling for me has been the tool that's led me to identify, appreciate, and then honor what my core values are, and then try to incorporate them throughout my life, not only in my work, but in my personal life. So I think journaling to me has been really important. And it's also been a place where I don't edit myself. Like
Mhm.
if I'm journaling, I don't think, oh, one day my kids are going to pick up this journal and read it. I may or may not choose to have them do that. But I just like blurt it all out on the page, and it's very free form and flowing. And sometimes it's about what I did because that's how I'm wired. But when it has more meaning to me, it's more just how I'm feeling and what those feelings are, and kind of like random thoughts. And it's helped me so much to identify what matters to me because
Mhm.
that's been hard for me to figure out.
I like that because also what's great about journaling is that yes, it's like so it's so free, right? It's just yours, it's personal. You don't have to be censoring for your audience, like I feel like I'm doing that all the time when I'm like creating content for social media. I'm like, oh, which platform am I on? And like who's my people? And so where can I be silly or where do I need to be serious? And when you're in your own personal journal, you can just be you. Completely unedited. You can also go back and look at it, which I think is really also helpful. Maybe, in a year from now or many years, you can go back or even month to month or whenever and just be like, oh, wow, look where I was then, or look what I was saying now, and now I've worked through that issue, or now I've used those tools, and this has become really important to me. So that's really interesting. It is a discovery process, and I think that there's very formal activities that you can do around creating them. They involve like those lists of words where there's like hundreds of words, and you kind of pick them out and scale them down to the five, and it's challenging. I found it to be challenging because also I have a lot more that's really important to me that's I think are like subcategories of these five values, right? Like, in commitment and acceptance and personal responsibility, there's subcategories like family, or health, or um, you know, being honest. So it's a very interesting process, but I do think that's one of the important parts of emotional sobriety work, that when we commit to working on ourselves, it's a part of building trust in ourselves, building that self-love, and creating the ability for us to even consider having boundaries, or to even consider that maybe our relationships aren't as healthy as we'd like them to be, or maybe somebody needs to be, not a part of our life, or maybe somebody doesn't need to be a part of our life. So these are the things we get to do when we stay sober and well, and when we commit to working on ourselves regularly.
But that's for sure.
Hmm. So Beth, where can you tell us a little bit about your work? I know you mentioned already your nonprofit. Can you just tell us a little bit about what you're up to, and kind of how things are going?
Sure, thanks. So I founded SoBar. It's a play on the word sober and bar in 2017. And we, for a while, were really the provider of adult non-alcoholic beverages at public social events and big festivals. And we're still doing that work, but this year we're working on a project called SoBar Certification and SoBar Secure. And they're programs for organizations, bars, and restaurants who really want to be more mindful about creating non-alcoholic beverage programs and making sure that people who don't drink alcohol for whatever reason feel included and part of. I don't know if you've ever gone out to a restaurant and really thought, I don't want water, soda, or iced tea. I'd like something a little more celebratory.
Yeah.
And that's really around what we're creating a program for. And perhaps more specifically, the safe service of adult non-alcoholic beverages. There have been some pretty sad stories in the news lately of people being served the wrong drink
Mm,
when they're at a table where someone's ordering a beverage with alcohol and someone's ordering a beverage without.
mm,
Even a 12-year-old who was hospitalized recently, who was served an alcoholic beverage. Apparently, the parent had made a decision that it was okay to order them a mocktail, and he got the wrong beverage and consumed alcohol. So I'm really excited about this program. I think it's going to help level the playing field and make the non-alcoholic beverage market safe for people to consume, especially people in recovery. Interesting, the same guy I was talking to the other day said that he had ordered a non-alcoholic beer at a restaurant, and the server actually left the can with the Pilsner that he had poured it into. And later he went to the waiter and he said to him, I'm kind of curious, why did you do that? And the waiter said to him, I'm in recovery and I would have wanted that there just in case I saw somebody so that they knew I was drinking something non-alcoholic and they didn't worry about what I was
yeah.
consuming. And it was a nuance that I hadn't even thought about, but I'm
Mhm,
taking that back to the team that's helping me put this staff training together. Some wonderful women who actually work in the food and beverage industry,
mhm.
as just another component of something we want to discuss and help train people to not only serve safely, but serve sensitively.
Yeah, I love that. I love the work that you're doing, and I've been familiar with it for a little bit now, and I'm also haven't had done some episodes actually last week. I don't know when this will come out, but I talked to Jen Gilhoy, who it does similar work in the Midwest, and she's doing really amazing things. There's just so many women that are doing incredible things in the space around NA beverages, and I love it because yes, many of us do desire to have, an aesthetically pleasing, sort of sophisticated drink when we're out that is safe for us. And one of the things that we talked about in that episode was, how each of us has an opportunity to speak up for that, right? We're all in organizations, we're all a part of schools and families and churches and work environments where we can have a voice and say, like, hey, what are we doing about the NA? Service in this particular event, or how could we incorporate a non-alcoholic product? We all have the opportunity to speak up on that, which I think when we do that, if we're all doing it, then we're going to really change the complete landscape of the world, especially in the corporate environments where so much is around alcohol, yet a lot of that stuff happens during the day, at 3 o'clock or whatever. And many people don't want to have a drink then. They have to go pick up their kids, or they're driving, and they would rather have a sophisticated adult beverage. And I think we're going to see just a tremendous amount of change in the next few years.
I do too. And I think that the data indicates, and we've done a lot of reading and researching to support this program, the data indicates two things that I think are significant. First of all, and I tell people all the time, I'm not running a temperance movement, but alcohol is an addictive drug. It's a stage 1 carcinogen. And the World Health Organization has said alcohol consumption in any amount is unhealthy. And I think the world is starting to listen.
Mhm.
The second thing is that the data suggests that the inclusion of adult non-alcoholic beverages on menus and every place that we go to celebrate will help people significantly reduce the amount of alcohol they consume.
Mhm.
So the information's out there, and you're right. Everybody needs to speak up and start to ask for what they'd like, similar to perhaps 10 years ago or 20 years ago when people said, gee, do you have anything that's vegan on your menu? Or do you have
Mhm.
anything that's gluten free? Or the safety protocols you see now in restaurants around nut allergies. Well, I have an alcohol allergy. What is there for me to enjoy?
I love that so much. So it's been so awesome talking to you. This has been a great conversation. I know everybody is really going to get a lot out of it. Where do you like people to connect with you if they want to reach out?
Thanks, Shelby. Our website is drinksobar.org. That's the best way to reach us. There's a form there if you have events coming up or want more information.
Thank you so much. I love it. And I will be sure to let you know when this is going to air, and we'll link it to all those things that we just mentioned, especially your website. And I can't wait for people to see it. So thank
Great
you
to
again.
talk with you.
Mhm.
Appreciate the conversation.